and Joyce.
Hey, hey,
We're
hey, Eugene. How are you,
we're
man?
staying alive. Staying alive. Listen, this is what, week 3 or 4 in a row. We're doing pretty
We're
well.
off the hook consistent, off the hook consistent here.
What's
This is
your my background is the same. Yours have changed, I think.
yeah.
Where in the
Uh,
world is Jim Joyce?
we're in Los Angeles for
Okay,
just a few days. So we're kind of doing a little SoCal
nice.
vacation, visiting some family down here. So that's it. Nothing too unique. Other than it's nice to be in California.
I thought you were picking up an acting career or something in California,
I'm
but you considering?
considering it. All options are on the table,
Hey, listen, exactly. You're open for business. Um, we do have our guest waiting, and I think today it's an interesting topic, right? Aside from being a great entrepreneur, so I've met Rachel, and as I'm going to let her in,
Great.
as she's entering in. Met her, I think, when I was a bear, but she'll probably correct me if I'm wrong in any way, shape, or form. So, Rachel, welcome to the Shot of Digital Health Therapy.
Hi, thank you, Jean. How are you doing?
Good, and I don't know if you met Jim or not
I
before,
don't
even in
know, but
passing, but
Jim, it's
but
great to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Rachel.
um,
Thanks for joining us.
I was just kind of kicking things off that the shot was actually created as a therapeutic intervention for Jim and I. And I would love to get to know you, but I think today also is a topic that I think a lot of entrepreneurs kind of shy away from. And we did want to put a little bit of shine the light on it and just get a little bit of Rachel therapy on it. But before we dive into some of those details, let's focus on you. And for our millions of listeners and viewers, would love to take us through your history, whichever way you want. From childhood on to now, professional, personal. We got
Sure. I
time.
mean, it's like very fitting to have this moment of reflection as today is my 40th birthday. And I'm
Hey,
celebrating it with you all. But it's no better time than a birthday to replay all of your
yeah,
the
Greatest
years and
hits.
years of what brought me here. So I was born in Philadelphia. I don't know to start that part, but
that's all right. We
um,
got time. I know
always
I know you're gonna have to have a drink very soon, and it is the shot of digital health therapy.
is true.
And because
No,
it's evening where I am, I may, as you're talking at some point, I'll probably go grab a drink and drink to your birthday.
oh, thank you. Um, well, so growing up, my mom had lupus and my stepbrother had cystic fibrosis, and so I grew up in a family where healthcare was front and center all the time. It wasn't something that was consciously thought of. It was just part of our life, making trips to the hospital, extended hospital stays. Um, there was no being scared of, well, for me at least, of needles or doctors or procedures. I was poked and prodded probably more as well, just because of, family history. Um, I studied journalism, biology, and French in college. I was pre-med. I worked in a hospital in Peru for a summer.
Wow.
I was able to do all sorts of things that are very illegal for non-medical students to be doing in the US. Sewed a guy's hand back on, learned how to read and take x-rays. Um, but I was doing all of that. I was pretty firm, and even though I was pre-med, I did never thought I actually wanted to be a doctor. There was a brief period in time where I wanted to be a pediatric gastroenterologist because I had a really
Did you
good
come? Did you come to that reflection as you were sewing the Peruvian guy's hand on that you didn't want to be a doctor, or
um yeah, I think yeah, it was a little bit more of now I actually think that maybe I go back and forth about whether I made the
Yeah.
right choice.
Sure.
But no, it was never really the procedural stuff that I liked to do, but more of the exploring and the explaining.
Mm.
And the patient care, but I truly believe that I was meant to be, or really good at. Here, I think here's the difference is that I never thought I was great at all the things related to medicine, but I knew I was a great journalist. I knew that I was, and I had gotten a lot of reassurance about my storytelling and writing abilities from a young age. And so the science, math stuff I really liked and was really interested in, but I wasn't sure I'd ever actually be able to do it. And
Did you
so,
ever have did you ever have an inkling of, I'll say, because I think translating that deep science and understanding of it into kind of storytelling is something that I think is lacking in general, right? And I think there's some great people out there that are doing it. Did you ever think of that angle, or
oh yeah,
was that
so yes,
that was
so
it, right?
that was
Like,
my
okay,
intent. So my
okay,
intent was to be a medical journalist, either here or abroad. Hence, I was also a French major, and so I wanted to live around the world and tell people stories about how science and medicine were impacting lives. Um, but I ended up working at 24-hour news stations in New York, and I loved it. And I happened to work at a place called New York One for 5 years, and New York One was a Time Warner channel, but it was one of the few non-union news shops in New York, which was really unique in that I could get my hands in everything.
hmm
Um, which typically in like a news shop, you know, you're an editor or a shooter or a reporter, you can't really cross those lines. And so what I was able to do is over the course of 5 years, I think I worked like almost every job. I was technically a web producer, meaning that in the early days of journalism, we would take the stories that were on the air, we would cut them down into web format, them as web copy.
hmm
And then we would start experimenting and exploring with different storytelling methods that were native to web first journalism. But I also started producing segments on my own. So going out in the field, I did some reporting up in Buffalo. I did some live producing, um, did Fashion Week, like really everything. I produced the call-in show that we did. I loved it actually.
amazing.
But I guess maybe it's the entrepreneurial side of me. I was always looking for what was next and always wanted to. Um, I was never content just with the opportunity in front of me. Um, at that time, this was also in like the early days of multimedia journalism across the board, and New York Times was building um, a web first local news bureau. And so I started doing some freelance work for them. It was like hyper focused web only. Again, like reporting, shooting, writing. And I thought I thought I really wanted to be a reporter in front of the camera telling stories. But I was poached by some old news guys. And when I say old news, I don't mean that they were old, just meaning that they were like traditional TV
Yeah.
broadcast local news guys who wanted to start a digital first news company. And they needed somebody who actually understood digital because they were all reporters and producers from the old school. And so they brought me on as senior producer. I was employee number 2, I think. And we brought the company from 0 to 1 billion lifetime views. I
Wow.
brought on a team of like 30 reporters, shooters, editors. We built the format. And while I was there, after we started building and scaling the team, they needed somebody who really understood the content and understood content strategy to help sell it.
hmm
And so they said the head of biz dev at the time, I think he was like the chief revenue officer or something, was like, you know, you have acumen for this. And I think if you're willing to like step away from the news side, you would be really good. And I had like a very big like crisis of confidence or like conscience or whatever. It was like, no, I'm not a business person. I'm a storyteller. I'm a reporter. Like this was the next step in that journey. Why am I like I really fought it like in terms of what is my identity if I am not that?
A news reporter.
And so I did it because it was an opportunity. And it was maybe a little more money, but it wasn't substantially more like to make that decision, but it was, somebody had a belief in me and this wasn't forever. If I didn't like it, there was an opportunity for me to move back. But I really,
risk-free trial.
yeah. I mean, I think everything comes with a risk though, because there's the risk of quote failing. And then in doing so, right, what that would have potentially impacted my psyche or my sense of self further. But I found I really liked the partnership component. I really loved, again, kind of similar, right? You use the same interviewing and listening and building skills with one into the other. And so I could really listen and understand what people wanted and needed and how can I translate that into a business opportunity. Again, while this was happening, because it was an earlier stage, I was kind of working as a product manager of sorts because we still needed somebody, and I didn't think about this at the time, but who understood encryption and who understood how to work with devs if the website was down. I had a potentially unfair advantage in that, and we'll probably talk about this later.
This is going to ask your husband, right?
Husband, yes, is a software engineer. So while some people would talk, I don't know what people talk about politics at dinner, we would talk digital strategy.
Code.
Not so much code. Yeah, we were like deep 0011101.
JavaScript 2.0.
Right.
Python.
But we would talk like product management tools, and I was just learning through synthesis at that time, and he was working at the New York Stock Exchange. And actually, there was from Hurricane Sandy, there was really like huge flooding down at the New York Stock Exchange, and so his whole team, which he was running at the time, was remote. And this was before there was like any remote structure. So him and like 6 devs were working out of our apartment in Brooklyn. So I really like had engineers everywhere.
Yeah.
And so my husband and I started tinkering in the early days of app development. And this was before there were dev shops everywhere to build iOS. It was just iOS apps at the time. And so we built.
And way before no code tools, which now everywhere, right?
La 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 la.
Agreed.
This is a audio only format, so that really probably translates really well.
No, it'll be video as well. Don't worry.
It's video.
All good.
You can see. Everyone can imagine your fingers in your ears.
Yes, thank you. Please imagine me being like a 4-year-old boy. So where was I? Oh, so we started building apps for fun.
Yeah.
And he would do the software development, and I would flex my sales marketing muscles in terms of understanding how app stores worked, how to market, work on the SEO and keyword optimization relating to these apps, what types of materials, whether it was visuals or video, would be most compelling, and then actually doing the content and the copy of the app. And so we built on things that we loved at the time. So first we built a fantasy football app. Then we built a phrase of the day app. So French, Spanish, and Russian. We did all of the phrases.
How did you pick those 3 languages versus?
Well, French, I speak fluently. Okay. So that was easy. I was able to do all the content. Spanish was something that I spoke enough of from living in Peru. And one of my best friends is from Venezuela. So I had somebody else who could create other phrases of the day. And then my husband's family, my brother-in-law's wife is Russian. And and we were able to get, access to
Right. No, I was just
content.
curious. How did you pick? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Fair.
And
Um,
what was the goal phrase of the day? Was language learning, inspiration, just fun,
Duolingo
lots of
OG.
downloads?
this was OG Duolingo, kind of. It wasn't, but the idea was that it wasn't so much like to become fluent in things, but it was feeling like you had
Touch point.
a collection of like fun and useful phrases that were definitely more native phrases than what you traditionally learn, or more conversational phrases. So, one of my there's like it's raining cats and dogs, like the equivalent of it's raining cats and dogs, but in French. Um, because when you're living there, right, it's not necessarily my parents like learned, I forget which program my parents did before they came to visit me in France, but like the only thing they knew how to say was the cheval saute, like the horses jump. And when they were lost and trying to get to my apartment and like stranded in southern France, they really were not conversant. So like giving a bunch
Right.
of phrases, and the way that the phrase of the day worked is that you also had like the library of all of these past phrases. So you could search. It wasn't like we randomly gave you a phrase and then there were games that we built. So you could
And was that
practice.
success? Was it successful?
Um,
The app,
considering the fact that like we put zero marketing dollars behind it,
right?
we had thousands of users, but it was never,
Amazing.
I was never like,
Never a runaway,
Yeah, was it
monetization
a?
process.
That's
no,
Yeah.
fair.
and we were both
Yeah.
working other jobs at the time.
So it was a
And
hobby.
it was a hobby, and it was a learning opportunity. We
Yeah.
really learned, and then it really brought us to the next phase, which was people started hiring us to build apps for them. And so I transitioned out of the full-time role that I had at the startup, um, and started consulting, more like media consulting, brand development, did a lot of branded content, which was very hot at that point in time. So shooting, writing, editing, those things. But really, we were not doing any cold outreach, but getting inbound requests from our network of like, can you build, they were very specific requests too. Can you build an Android version of this current app that we have? Or can you, where they didn't internally have the resources
Yeah.
to allocate for something on and off, we would step in and do it. And we did about a half a dozen. And while we were doing that, and while we were getting really good at building stuff from ideation to execution, I had an idea. And it was an idea that would have required me to slow down some of the other things. Like I realized very different than from Phraseaholic, which was our phrase app.
I like it.
Yeah, I like the
Um,
branding. Yeah.
I've always been we're pretty good at branding, as you know. Then it required more deep focus. It required me to start learning and becoming an expert in a new area. Um, and the idea was that we wanted a socially acceptable, safe place for people to communicate around their pain. And the concept of pain at that point in time was very broad. It was the idea that like when you were hurting, uh, and the hurting could be emotional, it could be physical, it could be chronic, it could be acute. There was no safe, structured, and supportive way to communicate that. And the tools in which to communicate it, like the language in which to communicate it, was also not there. And so the idea of Ouchie.
Now, before you go into that, and I think this is when we met, right, at Bear, when I was at Bear, and I think you guys were G4A at some point.
We were G4A, but like we met you when we were, I think, more Upside Health and Ouchie, but I met Bayer originally with Ouchie when it was pre-launch actually.
Pre-launch. How did you stumble? Like, was it a light bulb went off, or were you talking to a bunch of people, or were you on Reddit, or I'm making this up, but like, was it an idea that you sort of validated, or at least you've heard, or you just like, I don't know, you wanted to talk about something, whether it's physical or mental pain? You know what I mean? Like, how did it
What was the
rise?
inspiration?
Yeah, what's the inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, I think the original inspiration was that people really love to complain. Was like
Okay, that's true.
it's true. Like full stop, people love to complain, but and there is a place for complaining to some, but there are like meaning there's a place for complaining, meaning like there is some value in complaining.
On social
Mm.
media.
But
Not
at the
now.
time,
Yeah.
right, but at the time, that
Yeah.
wasn't really how social media was being used. And I found that when it came to health stuff, it was more misinformation
Yeah.
than information at that point in time. Um,
Spoken like
and
a true
we just,
journalist.
what'd you say?
Spoken like a true journalist.
So yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, we put a lot of feelers out. We ran focus groups. Like we did all of the diligence at the
Yeah.
time to start a business. The name though was like we were like, let's call it Ouchie. And then we bought the domain from somebody who wanted to sell it to us for like $30,000. And we said, how about 500? And they said, how about 1,000 or something? And it was the best, it was like the best negotiation. I was like, yeah, sure, we'll take it. Maybe it was $300 that we ended up, whatever it was totally uh
Do you
worth
guys
it.
still own?
We do.
Excellent.
But so Ouchie was our second child because we had my husband and I were married at that time. We had a daughter, and we raised a little bit of friends and family money. We built the whole infrastructure. A lot of the friends and family money was going towards like initial market research. Um,
Yep.
and we were able to maximize my media experience and got picked up in Health Magazine, uh, some other publications, generated a lot of users, but really struggled in my naivete at the beginning on business model.
Rachel, before we get into the business model and those like iterations and probably some of the tougher discussions, but
Mhm.
I'm going to put you on the spot. How's it been working with your husband? And it's funny because Marina and I,
Yep.
we always say we have, two kids, and your coach is our third baby. So like
Yes.
just sort of
So we do.
echoing.
So we did the
Yeah.
same exact thing. Um, so Ouchie that became Upside Health was our middle child. Came smack in the
Right.
middle of our Maisie and my younger daughter June. And so I mean, I can't say enough good things about working with my husband. It's kind of similar to you. I feel like you either know you can work with your spouse or you don't. And if
Yeah.
you don't think that you can work with your spouse, then don't. But if you can and you have that great partnership, then absolutely. In fact, I prefer to work with him full time than when we were working part time doing it because
Yeah.
that was a much greater strain on our relationship when he was working full time as a CTO for a digital agency and I was working full time as the CEO of our business. And I still needed things from him for us to move forward, but he was only half in mentally. And he was doing that so that way we could continue to live, but it
Mm.
wasn't the best for our working relationship. And when he was able to leave his other company full time and work full time as our CTO and is like a true co-founder, it was incredible. I think the reason it works really well for us and maybe similar to you, is that we have very different core competencies, very different skill sets,
What I say that
probably
God,
very different types of ADD. Like meaning that like our
We enjoy different things in the
never
business
play. What'd you say?
also. We enjoy different things in the business as well. And that's why it also works.
Exactly. And like
Yeah,
you
yeah.
think of like your 80/20, like my 80 and Jason's 80 are very different. And I would be so happy to like hand over some stuff to him that was just like sitting on my shoulder. Um, whereas I will always be better at certain things than he is, and he's totally okay with that. So that was one
There's
of
an
the topics.
expression, like there's an expression. I love the parent-child relationship. My mother always says that when someone in the family, someone's having some marital strain, she always says, well, God gives children two parents for a reason. So in this case, you need two parents to raise your Ouchie or your health coach or wherever.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, and I also think though, I mean, we've known each other since we were kind of like kids. We met when I was 21 and he was 23. So we've grown up together. Um, and so we have a shorthand. It's probably sometimes annoying for other people, but we can be really efficient.
Yeah.
I know it was really hard for a lot of investors.
I was good.
Um,
I was just gonna ask actually because we've gotten clear no's, like, and the only reason is because we're
yeah,
husband and wife, right? And our comment always, I mean, look, in any startup or in
there's
any,
risk.
you need a relationship with your co-founder, right? And a strong one, and trust has to be like,
Paramount. Yeah.
yeah, right. It's
And we've
paramount.
had
I
like
love that
negative
word.
experiences with
Yeah,
others
yeah,
that weren't ours. And I was like, the devil you know. I mean, in some ways is a lot better than the devil you don't. But I have the same thing,
yeah,
like there is no deeper trust. I mean, also we're raising kids together. We have
yeah,
invested financially invested a ton. So when you talk about like buy-in to a business, sometimes you will have one co-founder who is more bought in.
yeah.
The shared responsibility was incredibly deep. Um, and so I think I learned to say like those weren't the right investors for us, but it was definitely hard because we had like two things working against us, right? One, I was a female founder, just regardless, and especially for the beginning when we were fundraising, I was the female CEO. I was the one doing all the fundraising. And then secondarily, we were a husband and wife founding team. But that's not, I realized after a while that was not going to change, and the people that were going to support us
Yeah,
understood.
exactly. So Jim, I'm sorry to say this, but I think Rachel and I, given her journalistic background, Rachel and I, Marina and Jason, we're going to have a spin-off of the Shot of Digital Health Therapy where we interview other
Absolutely.
couple
Absolutely.
entrepreneurs. There you
Couple
go.
therapy. Yeah. Yeah. Couple
Couple
therapy.
therapy,
Couples
exactly.
therapy.
With definitely the idea of your first company, Rachel, where you were working one job and he was working another job, and the poor kid had two parents that didn't live in the house full time, whatever, whatever the little phraseaholic, system. But you guys definitely need a spin-off of couple startup therapy, whatever it's called.
Yeah, and it's also
What's
an interesting thing too. Like it was when we made decisions, which we'll get to a little bit later, spoiler alert, about the status of our current business. It was actually really hard on our children. Like
Hmm.
sure.
they were devastated because they have
Yeah,
grown
yeah.
up like,
It's part of the family. Yeah, it's part of the family. No, I have similar experiences myself.
yeah.
What's also it's interesting the whole dynamic of the investors. If you really unpack that, like why would the investors look at say, okay, we have a really kind of bonded, synced up team. You could probably quickly see like with both you would imagine, but I could see it with Marina and Eugene that they have different skill sets, different areas of interest, different passions, and that's what you need. They've obviously made huge commitments to each other in terms of, life and the company, but I would wonder if it's a power dynamic and a risk dynamic. So I think when the venture investors, they're really thinking about power and risk as a way of managing the economics. So it kind of puts a power dynamic almost in your hands in some ways because you're so unified. And obviously there's always a founder risk. Okay, what if the founder doesn't work out? So now they have two founders inside the company that if one goes, they both go. Do you think that's the reason that drives it?
I mean, I think that's part of it. I think part of it is truthfully personal. They don't believe that they could ever work with their spouse, and they have a really hard time
Okay, yeah.
imagining. No, no, and like a lot. I think that
Agree.
Sense, yeah.
there is the emotional component, or just like
Right.
anything else, you could have 17 different solo male founders who have failed. But if you have had one couple that's failed, it's like couples fail. It's just, and
Yeah,
you attribute it
cognitive bias.
to,
That's not the
We
way to
had
build a company, because I wouldn't build a company that way. Yeah.
and I think what's truthfully, like when you think about how most companies scale, like past Series B, the founders aren't going to be in leadership positions much longer anyway. Like, I mean, they be in leadership, maybe they're on the board, but like they're not necessarily CEOing
operational.
anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that you could get to, uh, if you got and understood the founders and connected with them, you would either be aligned in terms of their growth with the company or not, regardless of whether or not they're married. But it's also
What's so funny though?
it's
Yeah,
also
what's
a
funny
numbers
though
game,
is,
right? They have
yeah,
300 people that they're sifting through, and if they're
it's
not gonna,
easy.
they already see like husband and wife. All right, now like
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's an interesting. I think you talk about this a lot, Eugene. But even the idea, like no matter what, if you invest in a founder, whoever that founder is, and if they have a significant other or a partner, every major decision is probably being run by them. So you're fundamentally investing in that partner, whether it's visible to you or not. Yet they're going to be a super influential part of the whole system. But anyways,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I think we can probably talk for hours just on this topic alone. Seriously, I mean that is like almost like couples therapy, but we're on the
keep moving.
same page here. It's interesting, and even maybe just one quick other thing that we also noticed, whether it's fundraising or even on prospect calls, Marina and I will jump on, and there are still people that will sort of like turn on the virtual screen and ask me the business questions versus Marine, right? Like you can still see some biases in a lot of this, and interestingly enough, even from some women on the screen, right? It's kind of
Sure.
like so. Anyway, just
yeah, we saw a little bit less on the sales calls, truthfully, because I put myself out like front and center as kind of the expert when it came to chronic pain and disease management and all these CPT codes,
yeah,
to the point where he did a really good job, Jason, at being like, I am your integration expert.
yeah.
So I think that was very obvious. But there was definitely the difference in the questions that we got from investors when he was on the call versus if it was just me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean it's a learning thing. We always say too that when we start our next business together, I might not necessarily be the CTO every time. I mean the CEO every time. I mean, I will
Sure.
definitely won't be the CTO, but it's
I like where
very
this is
much.
going already. Just that statement alone. When we start the next business, so
Yeah,
Well, I
yeah.
mean, it's inevitable, but it's not anytime soon. But it's
So
very
where you're
much
at now.
um
So so bring us up to so
as we ran this
Ouchie got
company,
launched.
we ran Ouchie, we learned a ton, primarily that the people that were most utilizing our platform were those who were living in chronic pain. And those who were living with chronic pain were often living under fixed income or often underemployed as a result of their pain, and therefore didn't have the disposable incomes to pay for a subscription model as much as they loved our platform itself. And we discovered that we didn't think the best scalable strategy was ad sponsored, even though we had a lot of interest from pharma and device companies to run the business that way. We thought it like capped our growth potential. And at the same time, as I was learning that the product was really ripe for transformation in the pain space, I started connecting with pain doctors across the country, and they were telling me that what we were doing, because the product obviously continued to evolve as it was out in the hands of patients, was fitting an unmet need when it came to their care. And that if there was a way that it could be integrated within their care delivery model, they would absolutely use it. But the same question came up, who would be paying for it? Because doctors and hospitals don't have budgets for these programs. And because of kickback, all sorts of ways, like they just can't
yeah,
just plop it in there. And if nobody is responsible, if nobody is like holding the purse strings, then nobody is responsible. Meaning that
Sure.
there's no real incentive if it's free for everyone. And so that was around the time we joined Startup Health. Because we'd had enough traction users and we had a ton of data and product refinements, we decided to raise a little more money and become clinically integrated. And it was a big change because it was taking us from a B2C product to a B2B product. We were going from a purely consumer, non-regulated industry to a very regulated industry. We were going from a space that I knew a ton about to a place where I was going to be seen as a complete novice. But this is kind of where I discovered my superpower. And my superpower is taking a lot of information, synthesizing it really quickly, and becoming, if not an expert, a very conversant
You're like a
person.
human Chat GPT. There you go.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go. You're an actual human that can,
Beep boop, beep
Yeah.
boop. Again, here we go. Rachel's back to being a computer. But I mean, I think it comes back also to the journalism thing, right? You have to be able to be a journalist, to be knowledgeable,
read.
everything, expert in none, right? Like you have to be able to get really deep within a subject pretty quickly and then find a conversational way to communicate it. And so I was able, so when we made the transition from Ouchie, we created a company called Upside Health, in part because a lot of investors said they would not invest in a company named Ouchie. So we just created a generic shell sounding company called Upside Health. And then our product became Branch. And Branch Health was exactly what it sounds like. It was a critical branch of chronic pain care, an extension of care. And that transformation helped us, just changing the name and the direction alone helped us raise a little more money. But also was the emergence and the knowledge of the arriving RPM codes. And so we knew that if we could maximize those RPM codes, and I believe your audience knows RPM, but at that point in time, remote patient
I
monitoring,
think so.
then it transitioned into remote physiologic monitoring. Then we finally had like the CPT code. We finally had a way that physicians could integrate it in their practice, get paid, be incentivized to scale it. And we would be able to evolve the product to fit both the needs of the patients and the providers. We did that successfully. We continued to grow the product as new CPT codes emerged, worked really hard with the Connected Health Alliance and a bunch of other lobbying groups to develop the RTM codes, became one of the first pain company to successfully deploy those, got hundreds of EOBs from insurance providers when we successfully deployed it, found that we could expand the business model even further by not just offering the tech-enabled solution, but also offering the services. So we built our own clinical extension network of RNs, pain psychologists, case managers, dietitians, nutritionists, physical therapists, and pain psychologists, and became one of the largest repositories of natural language when it came to chronic pain. We were working in 12, I think we had 12 states where where Branch was being used.
Okay.
And we were on the path to profitability probably within the next 6 months. We had just signed an MSA with like one of the largest health systems in the country. And yet we hadn't taken a salary in 6 months, my husband and I, because every time we grew,
expenses.
There was some other things that needed to be spent on.
There were other things that needed to be spending. And so we would always make that sacrifice first. But there's one thing when you're like a 4-person company, it's another thing when you're like hitting almost 20 people. And it became a point in time where we had to have like a personal reckoning. We never raised the amount, and the other challenge was we'd always raise just enough.
Just
Mhm.
sure.
Just enough. And it was never what we wanted to raise, but it was enough that would allow us to reach the next milestone, but never the big milestone, because it was not, like, we couldn't actually put our foot on the gas. And here was an opportunity with this like large health system, MSA and whatnot. We couldn't front that money anymore. There was no more,
Sure.
there was no more wiggle room. And it was also really different for us to do that as a married couple transparently when the interest rates were like 2.5% than when they were 9%. Like, you can't bet against yourself so much anymore.
Mm.
And so we had to make the decision, raise a tiny bit of money, which could help us get to maybe the next where we'd have the same conversation over and over.
Over and
And
over.
that wasn't the business that we wanted to run. We wanted to transform the way that chronic pain care was assessed and treated. We knew we had the best product on the market to execute that. We knew we had the team. We knew we had the vision. There was nothing else we could possibly do to change anything. And if we hadn't, like, everybody that we'd speak to be like, well, I can't believe that you haven't raised
X,
more
whatever the
money,
next.
but because of that. And
Yep.
so that was the reality of the situation. And so I had to, kind of have a reckoning, a moment where it was like, we can't keep doing this as much as
Mm.
I want to, as much as this is my
Baby.
Middle child.
middle
Yep.
child. This is my middle child. As much as I don't think that we've accomplished everything I want to accomplish or we could accomplish. There's nowhere else we can go from here.
Sure.
And so we decided to look at, we ceased, let all of our clients know, tried to offboard everybody in like the most respectable way. We tried to hand off the product to other competitors in the space, even if we didn't think they were necessarily the best fits, just so they would.
You never
want to meet.
considered a sale? I
We
mean,
did.
to your point,
What
what
we
you
found,
described, yeah.
what we did, we definitely considered a sale. What we learned really about the space in the sale is there was a lot of companies earlier than we were who wanted our
Sure.
clients, but didn't necessarily want our product. And then there were bigger companies who wanted our products and didn't care about our clients. And the amount of time it would have taken to sell to a company like that.
Didn't have it.
And we had like, venture debt that, we had to take into account, and we didn't want to let anybody down. We felt like I was letting everybody down. But we also didn't, I was totally stuck. There was no other way.
Sure.
And what
Hard
was
call.
that kind of, and I know we're sort of nearing towards the end here. We got to save some time for Jim's, sort of famous question that will be reflective, I think, Rachel, for you. But that process, right, of, you guys sit down, with Jason, right, and what was it like? How long did it take? To your point, you guys just kind of like raised just enough, right? Like, is this something with like an aha moment? You guys woke up one morning and said, done.
So I, the last summer, we were in that point where we like took out even more personal money, sold something, sold a house. And we're like, what else? What else can we do? Like, we had a vacation rental property that we just sold it, even though we were using that money. And we're like, we don't have any other levers to pull. And a bunch of our investors came in and have a little money so we could launch the clients that we had set for September and October, because we had new clients set for September and October. Launched them, and then had a conversation with like a personal financial person who was like,
You guys.
pretty much was saying like, you guys are being irresponsible as
Yeah,
parents.
the water is kind of, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what are your other, like, there's,
You got these other two kids here
for
that
the sake, exactly, like,
yeah.
for the sake, you're not 18-year-olds living in your parents' basement. Like, I know, I
Yeah.
get what you're trying to do, and like, yes, this has the potential to make you millions, but like, at what cost? And one of the conversations was like, well, what are you going to cut from your
Yeah.
budget? And it was like, my kid's tutor. And I was like, if
Right.
we're like
Yeah.
suspending our health benefits or something, and I was like, if those are my choices, like, I don't think any
Yeah.
of our investors would want that. Like,
What
that's
what's amazing listening to, I mean, first of all, it's not actually a child, so you're not leaving a child behind. But but what's amazing is even listening to you talk about it, it's like you're incredibly reflective. I mean, you were taking on I mean, even if you look at the reason why the investors weren't putting the money in, because the investors, like Eugene and I, operate in the RTM space. Like, the investors they hadn't seen any outsized exits. They were going to trickle money in if they were available. They were never going to, if it broke, then they'd jump in like penguins. But
of
they
course,
weren't
and
going to
like,
jump in quickly.
we weren't quite positioned yet. Now it's very different. We could have positioned it as an AI play, because as we know, like, we had like one of the
Sure.
largest databases of natural languages that resulted in pain, and there was potentially some clinical decision support
Yeah.
angles. We could have taken it potentially in a different direction, but like, I understand it all. Like, our growth was too slow. Like, I understand it from where
All
our
the angles.
investors were. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
No, but
we
it's
had
amazing listening
to,
to you. It's amazing
yeah,
listening to you, because I always think with these things too, it's like it's kind of a flow in it, right? Like, you think about, all the employees, the people you touch, the learning, everything that came in, and how you
that was
build
the
these companies.
hardest.
Sense,
So that
right?
was
And the
the
patients and
hardest
the
thing for
consumers.
me. I mean, that one of the
Mm,
hardest things for me, I mean, there was like three things that were the hardest. One of them was our first two employees.
mm,
Feeling like I let them down, in part because like, they stuck with us through everything, and one of them was always like, oh, you'll figure it out. You always do. Because we had been
right.
in these
You did
situations
for 8 years. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
many times.
Yeah.
We did this for 8 years. And so for 5, 6 years together, we hit this point so many times.
Sure.
And then, but it was one night I couldn't sleep at all night. And I was like, we have to do this. Like, I have
Mm,
pro-conned it every way I could possibly go. And I said it to Jason, and he was like, yeah, if you want to. Like, he was waiting for me. Like, he would have been okay again, because I was the CEO and he was
sure.
following my vision. I was
Right.
like the visionary in that situation. He was the executor. Um, I think the second thing that was really hard were our clients,
Sure.
clients and patients, right? So we had patients who were using our platform every day for like almost 3 years, every
Mm,
single day. And they relied, kind of similar to Gene, like, they relied on our nurses and the relationship that they had built. And so saying to them, like, Sarah, at the end of this month, like, you're not going to have this anymore. And I don't really have a good solution to give you. And I'm doing this because personally, I can't
sure.
financially anymore. Like, I didn't love that. And it felt like I had, at the time,
Sure.
nothing to show for it.
Mm,
And that was, I think, one of the hardest, that was the hardest decision I probably had to make. But we did it
100%.
last November. And the reason I'm like very reflective right now was this is now months later. So even though we
Sure.
made that decision, and I made that decision the day before Halloween, November, like right away we spoke to our like we were in an open conversation with our investors the entire time, trying to come up with solutions that would like be the most favorable for them. Um, we ceased clinical operations though, um, at the end of November, and then started the process of either looking for exits or trying to see what made the most sense. We
Sure.
are still in then we like left the servers and everything up for a long period of time, but took them off of like HIPAA compliance because we offloaded all the patient information. And then finally filed the paperwork to dissolve. And yet still haven't gotten the paperwork. And so we still have like accounts that are stuck open because I can't close them without the dissolution paperwork, and Delaware still hasn't sent me the dissolution paperwork. So like when this is
Sure.
all
So
done,
you were hoping to sort of, rip the Band-Aid, right? But the process
Right.
won't let you leave it
It's
behind.
no,
never
but
that way.
and like
Yeah.
nobody like tells you about that. Maybe like at larger levels, but like the personal financial responsibility just doesn't end. Like when you shut a business down, if you have any credit card debt, like you as the founder who opens it up are personally liable. Not the bit like you just because
Sure.
the business closes does not
Sure.
mean
You're.
you're not liable.
Yeah.
So
No,
like
it's huge. It's huge.
here,
Yeah.
and so that's what it
Ramifications. Yeah.
also came down to with our investors. We were like, you guys are like,
Yeah.
yes, you're in this for money, but you can write off. Like we are stuck.
Mm.
Jason and I are stuck with the financial decision we made. So once that all gets cleared out eventually, maybe I'll feel
A little
a little
freer,
relief,
like
but
a free.
until
Yeah.
then, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Amazing.
first of all, thank you for being so open. Again, I know we have founders, and you see things in the news where people raise capital, but I don't think we as entrepreneurs talk enough about things that we can learn from others that have gone through the shutdown experiences, right? And yeah, I know you said the word failure, but again, I think sort of we've known each other now for probably, I'd say, almost approaching a decade too, because I've been doing this with Marina for almost 5 years, and then spent 4 years in Bayer. So yeah, but anyway, so I know you guys been at it and touched a lot of
No, it was eight,
lives.
yeah,
So
it was 8 years
yeah,
that I ran this business. I guess I
Mm.
don't know if you continue the fact that it's still not officially closed. But thank you. And I totally agree. When I went to shut down, I couldn't even find a new resource, like very few resources about it. And the idea that like the exit is what everyone is seeking, and being able to put like exited on your LinkedIn, I don't think is the only, I'm learning is like not the only way to have a successful
Mm.
business. Um,
Sure.
on just kind of quickly in that note, and then Jim, I'll leave it to you for your final question. But I just saw something. I think it was in like PitchBook newsletter or whatever. There are companies now raising money, helping startups shut down. Because I think
Interesting.
2024 has been the highest number of startups being shut down, right? So, but it's interesting how investors are then, there's like 2 or 3 companies that I saw raise a crap load of money to help other companies shut down. So it's just
Mm.
fascinating, honestly.
Awesome.
Anyway, Jim Joyce, to your famous question.
Well, first of all, virtual hug from I'm in LA now,
And
but from
and
Eugene and I. Happy birthday! Happy
yes.
birthday!
happy birthday, and I'm gonna have a little bit
You
of
have
a
a
sip.
Beanie there? Lafroig. Okay.
Yeah, a little, just a little tiny sip, just to honor your birthday,
Yeah,
Rachel.
Thank you very
yeah.
much.
And I mean, and I'll go into the question, but the biggest thing is this. It just it's amazing. It's amazing what you've done, what you've built, all the people you touch, and this is just part of it. So these
Yeah.
things pass. They go through
Actually,
states and different things, and you
I'm
taught
loving
people how to.
consulting right now too,
Yeah,
actually. Like I'm
yeah,
full-time consulting now, and I actually love it. I love helping I've always loved mentoring and supporting other companies. So whether it's like early stage founders building commercialization strategies, like
mm,
I get to use that exciting part of my brain again where I'm trying to solve a lot of problems.
yeah.
Um, Seeing a lot of
But it's
different
clear.
leadership.
It's
It's
clear
fun.
to me. It's clear to me that there's, and you're so young, and you've obviously got huge tech talent in the family. You guys speak code over dinner, so I think that it's no doubt. Like I can't. So if you just imagine yourself now, and you're going back to your home state of Pennsylvania, right? Is your home state, or you kind of grew up in New York, so you're being asked to give a keynote speech based on the new chronic pain management system that you launched, about a year after you after Upside Health, after you close down Upside Health. So you're giving a keynote speech, and you've had a hugely successful exit. Funding was everywhere. You're touching so many people around the world. You've got this phenomenal company. Say, would you come back and would you give this talk at this big startup health event that we're running in Pennsylvania? So you're there and you're giving this talk, and you're talking about everything you've learned in building companies and the trials and tribulations and the ups and downs, and people are captivated by you. But this one woman sitting in the crowd, and she's looking in the crowd, and she sees you, and right after you come off the stage, she beelines towards you, and she's like, Rachel, I have to talk to you. You don't understand. I speak multiple languages, French and Russian, and I've also sewn a hand on a Peruvian man. I've done that as well, and I was a news reporter just like you. Then I went in and I married a engineer and started up my own company right now, and we're in the beginning of starting up company, accessing very well-established RPT codes and RPM codes right there. And I'm starting this company, and you look at that young version of yourself. What's the one piece of advice you would give her?
One piece of advice.
We'll give you two, Rachel, if needed. You
Yeah.
can boil it down to the one.
So the three that I always give, it's just like the three things that I would always say.
You're a good bargainer. You really are.
The three that I always say is, one, follow the opportunity. Like, don't be so tied to your ideals that you miss opportunity right in front of you. Two, on the flip side, do not take everyone's advice as gold. I spent way too much time chasing down things that I thought these people were smarter than me and wasting a lot of time. And the third is business model. I mean, be obsessive about what the commercialization strategy is, especially if you're in healthcare, and be obsessive about knowing, if you do not know the financial motivators for your clients, and you cannot build very clear buyer personas and like why they need to have your product, and somebody on your founding team can do that. Do not, if you cannot, if someone on your founding team does not know that answer, you're not ready yet. When someone on your founding team knows that answer and can answer that question, product comes second, and you will raise the money. But
Awesome.
if you cannot answer that question, then you need to do more research before you launch that business.
Awesome.
Rachel.
Happy birthday.
Thank
Happy
you.
birthday.
Great
you
meeting
for
you
joining
guys.
us.
Speak
Take
soon.
care.
Bye.
Nice meeting you. Congrats. Bye.
Follow, subscribe, pass it on.